So there are certain things that are the staple diet of fish in our rivers, and this little creature is one of them. This is a Gammarus. In fact, a couple of them that came from a river fly sample carried out on the River Meon in Hampshire. Now, the amount of Gammarus in the Meon is extraordinary. In fact, one of my mates, Matt Owen, farmer, who actually was responsible for carrying out the survey where we got these Gammarus, said the actual biomass of these things in the river, you can't believe that all the trout living in the Meon aren't 10 pounds each. There are thousands and thousands, in fact millions of them. Now, of course, not every river has a healthy head of Gammarus. In fact, just across the way closer to Winchester in Hampshire, in the Itchen, for example, the Gammarus, there aren't that many of them at all. But where they are present, like these creatures, they are well worth using as a source for getting takes from both trout and grayling. So what I'm going to tie for you today is my go-to Gammarus pattern. I tend to use this one on a top dropper. So if I'm fishing 2 flies, I'll have something heavy on the point, and this will be 50 centimetres above it on a short dropper, about, I suppose, 6 inches of fluorocarbon, and this tied on it. It's a fantastic pattern. It's as imitative as I could get it for the actual Gammarus itself, although the colours are slightly different, I suppose. And it's one of those flies that I think represents a couple of different things. It certainly represents the actual freshwater shrimp, but it also looks a little bit like, I suppose, some of the caddis patterns, something like that, some of the natural caddis that are in the river. But mainly it's supposed to imitate, though, a Gammarus, so a freshwater shrimp. So let's get on with the tie. First of all, let's whiz through the materials then. So in the vise, I've got a Hanak H333BL, a barbless Czech nymph hook, size 12, so this is quite a big fly. You can also use the Hanak clink hammer hooks for this. I really like the fact that they've got quite a lot of clearance between the point of the hook and the shank. The other materials, I'm going to use some flat lead wire. This is a hen's flat lead wire, which is what I'm going to use to build up the weight for this fly. It's not as heavy as some of the flies with a tungsten bead, but it does still need some weight. I'm going to use some bog standard fluorocarbon as a rib. It doesn't matter what weight really. This is £3. That is completely irrelevant. I'm going to be using some translucent nymph skin to form basically a shell back. And I'm also going to be using some of this wonderful stuff to form the main kind of dubbing underneath my my rib and my translucent back, which is an Andrews Scruffy dubbing blend from Trout Stalker, and perhaps no surprise, the one I've chosen is called Gammarus. Okay, tying thread is just a Semperfli nano silk, and I'm just going to catch on to begin with and just put a little bed of thread down here. As I say, this is a really useful fly fished in a team, but don't ignore the fact it can be fished singly as well. One of the best tactics with it is to use something like a Euro nymph line, perhaps like one of the airflow ones or something similar, one of these mega thin lines that you can use just to present nymphs with a slightly coloured tip. And just fish it on a really short length of line, about 3 to 4 feet, depending on the depth of the water that you're fishing in. And just watch that tip of the line like a hawk, and as soon as you get takes from the fish that grab these little Gammarus patterns, it's really, really engaging and great fun way of fishing, very, very effective. If you don't put too much lead on these, you can actually fish 2 of these on one of those Euro nymph lines, but yeah, it's just a really effective way of fishing. Okay, so I've caught on and I've laid down a little bed of the tying thread. Now I'm going to take a strip of lead here. This is flat lead, not round, and I do this slightly differently to a lot of people. So of course you can just get the round lead wire and wind it around the hook to produce the weight, but I do it slightly differently. And the reason is to just kind of, again, keep that clearance between the hook point and the shank of the hook. So essentially what I'm going to do is build up layers of lead on top of the hook in little tiny strips. So the first one's going on like that. I just introduce it to the middle like so, catch it in with the tying thread, and just lay down one length of lead on top like so, all the way along the entire sort of area that I'm going to be putting the dressing. Now because I'm using this nano silk, I can now just gently pull and actually break off the lead like so. You've got to be a little bit careful with this nano silk using lead because it will cut through the lead like a hot knife through butter, so don't pull too hard. Now I'm just going to carry on building up layers here. So the next one that goes in, again, right across the middle like that, is slightly shorter than the first. And I'm just going to, again, just catch it in like so. And I don't want to take it all the way to the end. I want it to be shorter than the first bit. I'm just going to stress that off and go back to the centre. I do the sort of same number of bits of lead on each of these flies normally, just to keep a level of consistency. Again, next one going in, so that's going to be a shorter length again. So the first one goes all the way along the hook, the second slightly shorter, and this one the shortest of all. Again, just short of that second bit, you can probably just see the second piece of lead protruding from underneath. Stress it off, and then just to keep everything neat and tidy, I'm going to put one more piece of lead right over the top, over the whole length, just short of the eye, because I need to be able to finish off the fly. So about there, perfect. Just kind of catch it all in, again, not pulling too hard because you don't want to cut through the lead. And I'm just going to take it all the way to the end. And then I can just pull my thread and cut that piece of lead off like so. And you can already sort of start to see the profile of this fly starting to build here. So there's my check nymph hook and that kind of classic check nymph profile, which is really good. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a short length of fluorocarbon. It doesn't have to be fluorocarbon, could be monofilament, it's just fishing line. And this will form my rib, so I'm just going to catch that in all the way down off the back of the hook and just lash it down to the back there so it's nice and tidy, and just pop that in my spring so that I can keep it out of the way for the next bit of the tie. Okay, now I'm going to introduce my shellback, which is the virtual nymph skin in translucent, and you can use different colours. I just like this because I can customise it. You can sort of colour this in loads of different colours, and actually, as I mentioned earlier on, this will make a really useful imitation for a caddis, and if you coloured this in bright green, it would be just like a caddis, caseless caddis. So first job is just cut a little V in the end, like so. Just helps it to be neat and tidy. And the trickiest bit of this fly is this next bit of the process. So I'm going to take my tying thread down off the back again and into this position here. And again, it's a very fine thread, which means that it's quite strong and you're able to put a few turns in. Just let my bobbin hang down, and then I'm going to lay my piece of nymph skin here and trap it with my fingernail on the other finger. So just like so. What that means is you don't get a bulky little bit off the back of the fly. And I've just got to try and catch that in with a few turns of thread. You can probably just about see I've just managed to get the just that top part of the V off the back of the hook. So that just means that I can safely catch that bit in. Now I've started doing that because I got told off by Charles Jardine. And what I previously did was just kind of fold it back over and tie it in. And he sent me a message saying that it looked a bit bulky. So ever since then, I've learned to do it that way. And I actually have to say, don't tell him I told you, but I prefer it this way. Okay, next part of the process is the dubbing. So I love this stuff. It's really terrific. I've got lots of different colours of it. This Gammarus pattern is just a lovely kind of neutral grey. And if you look at those real insects, you know, this is what their underbody looks like. It's that kind of translucent, but a really neutral colour. I'm just making a fairly substantial little dubbing rope here. And try and spin it onto your thread in a similar sort of profile to what you would expect it to lie onto the hook. So thin bits at each end and a fat bit in the middle is a good way to go. You may need to add a little bit more. I'm just going to pull the nymph skin gently out of the way. Don't want to pull it too hard. And just start to add the dubbing to the body of the fly in touching turns. I've got to the middle, so a bit more is needed. And these do eat up a fair bit of dubbing. And you're going to brush this out at the end, so it's a useful thing to remember to get quite a decent chunk of dubbing in there. Okay, so stop short of the eye, about 4 or 5 mils, and then I'm just going to grab my nymph skin and gently pull it up to the front of the fly. Now I don't want to pull it too hard because I don't want to stretch it too much, and then I'm just going to pinch with my finger and thumb on my other hand to hold it in place and use my tying thread to catch in the end of that piece of nymph skin, like so. So it forms a nice back on the fly. A few turns of thread. Once it's really nicely secured, you can get hold of this tag end and pull it so it stretches quite a lot, and just try not to pull the fly out of the vise by pulling too hard, but just stretch it so that when you trim you get a nice neat and tidy end, like so. Just tidy that up a wee bit more. Okay, I mean, you can see how this is going. It's a cracking looking profile for a fly. The next job is to grab my monofilament and produce my rib. So just nice big open turns, squashing down that nymph skin and pulling it quite tight so you get that segmented look. Just continuing to sort of correct with my other hand, so just sort of shifting that nymph skin back on top of the fly so that it doesn't become uneven. And then when you get to the end, another little tricky bit, but just sort of drop your thread over the top of the monofilament or fluorocarbon, whatever you're using, just to lock it in place. And then I'm going to trim off. Okay. I can now do my whip finish. There are a couple of other things I'm going to do with this fly, so once the whip finish is in, I'll just do another one to secure everything down. I'm going to trim off, and I'm going to grab a Sharpie. This one is brown, and this is the colour that I've used most often with this pattern, which isn't actually a million miles away from one tied by my mate Ben Bangham, who ties this as something he calls a disco shrimp. So he uses a green wire over the top instead of the monofilament. And the body, the dubbing, is much more kind of sparkly. It's got some purple and some orange in it. It makes it look really blingy, a brilliant winter grayling pattern. But uses a brown Sharpie to colour the back. So I'm just going to do that now. And just kind of gently stroke the colours, just to colour in all of that nymph skin. As I say, you could use a different coloured Sharpie here, and if you used a bright green one, you would get something that looked amazingly like a caseless caddis. Now, although this is a permanent marker, the one thing I've found is that where these flies get a right battering from fish eating them, from bouncing around wherever, the colour starts to come off. So what I've started doing the last couple of years is actually putting a layer of, if I could find my dubbing needle, which has disappeared on my desk somewhere, there it is. Yeah, I put a layer of UV bug bond over the top of this. Now, when you're doing this, just leave the Sharpie to dry for a couple of seconds before you start doing this, otherwise it kind of all smudges. But I'm just going to dab this on top, because what you don't want to lose is that lovely segmentation that you've taken trouble to pull together. But this really is worth doing, because it does make this just ping a little bit. Now, once I've got a layer of this on, I'm just going to, again, use my dubbing needle just to make sure that bug bond beds down inside the segments there. And then I'm going to cure it with my torch, like so. You can already see it's looking quite leggy, isn't it? I mean, that's the beauty of this fly. That's what it's supposed to look like, the sort of leggy freshwater shrimp pinging about. One of the ways to fish this, of course, as it's on a dropper, it's a very good idea to sort of jig your cast as you're retrieving it on something like a French or Spanish leader, because these things are really darty. They whiz around all over the place, and if you ever get a sample and you start to see these things whizzing around in the tray, you can see how active they are. So, you know, don't be frightened to move the rod tip around a little bit and jig this around and give it some life. The one thing I'm going to do now, the last part of the fly, is to take a little dubbing brush and just give it a bit of a brush here to pull out some of those dubbing fibres to make it look a little bit more leggy and a bit more lifelike. Again, trapping air bubbles, a little bit of movement, that sort of thing. If this does get a little bit too unwieldy, you can of course run your scissors across there. In fact, I'm just going to do that just to neaten it up just a little bit. And there we go. That's my version of a freshwater shrimp, a Gammarus. Fantastic fly to fish as part of a team, so on a top dropper or a middle dropper, or as a single fly on a leader that's designed for showing you indications, like a Euro nymph or something similar. I hope you've enjoyed the tie. I hope you have good luck tying it. And once again, thanks ever so much for watching.